action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Tim Plester. Actor, filmmaker, playwright, an all-round stellar fella, off-screen anyway. Tim is best known for selling drugs to Ricky Gervais in Netflix Afterlife and slitting Cat Stark's throat in Game of Thrones. Alongside his film and TV work, Tim has a well-documented passion for weird and enduring folk customs of our Sceptred Isle, won the National Student Playwright of the Year award, and has featured in over 70 adverts. Yes, that's right, he was once one of the 118 runners. Tim says, "The picture you've used is actually of me in character from Netflix's Afterlife, but hopefully that won't mean people are expecting me to come on the podcast with the sole intention of selling you some drugs." It's not the sole intention, Tim, but I assume we're peddling something. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Pleasure to be here, Giles. Thanks for having me on. I'd have to say, without kind of revealing too much the inner workings of these things, I was a bit disappointed we didn't get to hear the theme tune. Yeah, I mean, obviously the listeners will have heard it before you did the intro, but I'm sat here thinking, when do we get the call to action tune? Which I'm guessing that isn't you singing.
No, but you'll be amazed how many people think it is.
See, it's disappointing. It's not you. I have to say.
I'll tell you what, Tim, after this, I'll send you a brief audio of me singing the theme tune.
I would love that. I would love that. Thank you.
7 quick-fire questions, Tim. Number 1, tea or coffee?
I have to have a tea to start the day, always, and then I move to coffee. I'm allowed 1 coffee a day, but that's the thing. That's the part of the day I look forward to most is the coffee, but I have to have the tea first. So, but I mean both. That's both of them.
Number 2, Kenny Dalglish or Jurgen Klopp?
Goodness me. I mean Kenny. It's Kenny.
Stark or Lannister?
I'll side with the Lannisters.
Way of the Morris or the Ballad of Shirley Collins?
I'm going to go Way of the Morris just because that was first.
Real drugs or film set drugs?
Film set drugs are usually very disappointing.
Yeah.
So let's go real. Real drugs.
The only reason that's in partly is because it reminds me of the late, great Mitch Hedberg, whose brilliant advice was do not buy pot on a movie set.
Well, he would be right. It's usually herbal cigarettes is what you end up with.
Right, 2 more. Doritos Allen or Nobby's Nuts?
Oh, I'm going to go Nobby's Nuts purely for the chance I had to work with Noddy Holder, who was like a childhood hero of mine.
Good answer. We'll come on to that later, hopefully. And then lastly, you've played them both. King Herod or the Angel Gabriel?
Oh my God. Where did you find that? Herod. The villain's always, villain's always more fun. Yeah.
Amazing. I didn't really trip you up then, but Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
You almost tripped me up by that last one there, because that's deep knowledge. That's from a school nativity when I got the chance to play both parts, both Herod and Gabriel.
That shows range.
It does show range. That's what I was trying to show, even at an early age, Giles. Yeah.
So I've already referred to Afterlife, Game of Thrones, only 3 of the over 70 ads that you featured in, and I don't really know where to start, but fortunately...
Two of the documentaries.
And 2 of the documentaries that you've made, of course, yes. So I need to stick to the script as always, which is quite fortunate, and ask what was your first ever job, and then what was your first proper acting job?
Before I get to that, I'll quickly say there is a way of connecting at least 2 of those items in that if you watch my documentary Way of the Morris, there is a brief shot in it of me dressed as Noddy Holder as a child. There's a connect to see what does, that there's a little kind of tether point between the two there. But actually talking about me as a child dressed as Noddy Holder kind of leads me on to answering your actual question, which is my first job was actually as a paper boy, and that stems from the fact that I needed to pay for my comic book habit as a child, because my grandparents owned the local newspaper business in a village called Adderbury, which is outside Banbury and up in North Oxfordshire, and so they would spend a lot of time setting up the orders for the village with, it would all be very precisely done so that whoever had the papers knew, which door they were going to and which paper would go in, and the comics for the children of that village would be in that pile, and I would go in after they'd done it and just whip out all the comics and go and read them. And so in the end, my grandparents came up with a way of me not doing that by saying, well, look, we'll get you your own copies of the comics, but you have to do something in return, which was to go and do some delivering, which is what I did. And again, interesting, there's a shot of me. There is empirical evidence of this job, because again, in the documentary film Way of the Morris, there is one shot of me on Super 8 as a paper boy delivering comics in the village. So that was my first job, but the comic books are a really important part of my my life and my pathway, really, I think, into doing what I've ended up doing. I started off reading a lot of British comics when I was a kid, and then slowly moved into American comics, Marvel, DC, and then from there into more kind of underground, independent American comics. And it's still something which I read a lot of today. Comic books have remained a passion from way back when. My first proper acting job, or my first paid acting job. So I went to college. I'll get there. I went to college, a place called Dartington in Devon, which sadly isn't there anymore. And it was quite a unique training ground in that it was a 4-year course, and this was a theatre studies course that I did. And in the third year, you were basically kicked out of the college and asked to go and get work experience in the real world. And then the idea being that you would come back for your final year, 4th year, and kind of put stuff into practice that you would learn on placement. And so I went off and I worked with a company called Payne's Plough in London. It was the first time I'd really spent any time in London as well. So that was important in terms of my development. And Payne's Plough only did new writing. That was kind of what I was really interested in while I was at college. I'd kind of gone there wanting to be an actor, really, which stems from going back to playing Herod and Gabriel, and wanting to kind of corner 2 of the best roles in the Nativity, both for myself. And I'd written plays when I was at school, again, and given the best parts to myself. And then when I was at college, as you mentioned at the top, I won the National Student Playwright of the Year award. So I think at that point, although acting was still, I guess, my primary passion, I felt like the kind of the warp and woof of the universe was suggesting that I should maybe be a writer instead. That, if you've won this award, that means you're probably quite good at it. Maybe you should concentrate on that. So I stopped acting for a while. I graduated. I came to live in London. I set up a theatre company with a couple of fellow graduates, and I acted in the first show that we did. But after that, I decided I wasn't going to act anymore. I was just going to write. I was going to produce. I was going to basically just help run the theatre company in terms of organising tours, trying to raise funds for it, and kind of be in not in the background, but certainly I wasn't going to be on the stage anymore. So I'd stopped acting for a while. I ran that theatre company with my friend for 3 or 4 years on the London Fringe. I mean, completely on the breadline. We managed to keep it going. It was amazing, really. We were able to keep going for that long. We did 2 Edinburgh Fringe festivals. Then I went off to Birmingham and I did an MA in playwriting because I was still kind of convinced that, that was going to be my path. I was going to be a writer. And then I came back to London from Birmingham and it's interesting. This is an interesting connection. So a chap called Rob Curry, who was running a theatre company at that time, was looking for somebody at very last minute to be in a play he was doing on the Fringe, and somebody had suggested, I vaguely knew Rob, and somebody suggested he should audition me because I used to be an actor, apparently, which is true. And he came to see me and he offered me the part. And I went and did this show that Rob was directing. Interestingly, Rob is now who I work with when I make my documentaries. He's my co-director when I do that work. So our relationship kind of begins there and has grown and developed and evolved since then. But when I did that show with Rob on the Fringe, I think it kind of rekindled something in me about the acting, and I realized that I had missed it. But I'd probably benefited from being away from it for a while as well. I felt like I was coming back to it slightly refreshed. And so, I did that show and I thought, well, can I get an agent here? How difficult could that be? And luckily, I'd met a few agents through the shows that my theatre company had been putting on. And one of them I approached because I got on well with her socially. And she said, okay, well, I didn't know you were an actor. I'll take you on and start putting you up for stuff. So it was in a way that simple for me, which is why when young actors often ask me about how they should get started in the business, I'm like the worst person to ask, because that is not how it normally works. It's like I knew somebody who was an agent and I asked if they'd take me on and they said yes. I mean, and to her credit, she would then put me up for stuff to see if I was any good, and I started to get jobs. So, she basically said to me, you've got an interesting face. I think I can sell that look. And so she started putting me up for commercials initially. So that's how I first come into any kind of dealings with advertising in the commercial world. I was only really getting seen for commercials when I first started out. And I was very happy with that because it meant, usually it was 1-2 days work. It paid very nicely. Thank you very much. And I still had lots of time to carry on running the theatre company. So the first commercial I ever did was for Curry's, I think, and we filmed it somewhere in West London. This is a weird kind of offshoot of where the conversation should be going, Giles. But my main memory of that shoot is being in either the makeup or the costume truck. And this is all kind of new experience to me, being on a film set. And I think it was with the makeup girls, and they were talking about Rowan Atkinson, the actor. I was very, very aware of the actor, Rowan Atkinson. There might be people who've never heard of him. And basically talking about the size of his member. Nice. Apparently he's very, very well blessed down there, is Rowan Atkinson. That is, when we started this conversation, that's not where I wanted to take the chat at all.
It's where I hoped it would end.
But that's where we come to. But that's weirdly that's the main bit of that job that I remember, is that chat in the makeup truck.
It's interesting because I think there's few people I've spoken to on Call to Action who probably wouldn't also say they're the worst person to give people advice on how to break into whatever industry it is they're in. But one of the things that I have flagged with you, Tim, is that you at least had seemingly a lot of awareness that you wanted to be an actor, albeit it then kind of evolved slightly into writing and then maybe stepped back into acting, or has obviously stepped back into acting. Did writing just feel more accessible when you started to follow that path, or did you stop to believe that you were an actor? Or was it just simply a case of not really knowing? Because I think that's certainly something that comes up time and time again. Well, you can't know what you don't know. And actually that stage of life needs to be more about discovering than it is about knowing the answers.
I mean, I think that's got a lot to do with it. It's definitely a voyage of discovery, those those years for sure. And you kind of, there's the argument you have to make a few wrong turns to kind of find the right one, really. But also in a way, that's it's almost a blessing of being of a different generation. Because if I think about my parents' generation, you didn't get the chance to mess around like that. You made a decision, you stuck to it. You probably met somebody, got married, started a family, and you worked in that job until you retired. So in a way, I kind of, I'm early 50s now, and I consider myself to probably be in that certainly first or second generation of people who really had a bit more freedom to kind of think about what do I actually want to do with and I was certainly the first one in my family to have ever really kind of been told that, what you want to, what are your dreams, what are your hopes, do you want to pursue them? We will, support you, back you with that, particularly in a job like, wanting to be an actor, So I feel very blessed that, my family were always very supportive of that and gave me their backing to go for it. But I tell you, the other reason why I think I shied away from acting as well is while I was still at college, I had a girlfriend at the time, and I was really into her, and I was talking about going to live in London because I wanted to be an actor, and she said, I don't think I can come with you because I don't think I can sit and watch you wait for that phone to ring. I think it will destroy you, and I think it will destroy us. That stayed with me, that idea. And so my decision to start the theatre company was really about trying to do something that was a bit more proactive, and I think that is a problem about being an actor. You can't, I'm going to say you can't act on your own. You couldn't act on your own. I'm going back to mid-90s now. You can act on your own now. You can go on TikTok. Do you know what I mean? It's just occurring to me now as I'm saying that. That's not even true anymore. There are ways to generate material and get it out there on your own in a way that just was not when I graduated. It literally did not exist. I'm that old. That did not exist. You had to go through the traditional channels, theatre, TV, film. And they all, to be honest, they all looked quite, very difficult. Theatre I could understand, which is why I set the theatre company up. I could understand how that worked. I could get my head around it. But film and TV, even at that age, just felt like, how do you even get there? What is it? It still felt to some degree this magic box in the corner that, I have no idea how you get into it. I didn't know, I grew up in Oxfordshire. I didn't know anybody who worked in film and TV. It was my family. There was no one I could talk to about it. It was honestly had no real idea how you did it. I knew that you probably had to come to London. You probably had to get an equity card. Didn't, as it turned out, and probably get an agent. Those are as much as I really understood about it. So yeah, I definitely shied away from that for, I think it was 2-3 years when I first came to London. And yeah, got very lucky with getting an agent without even really trying.
I think it's important to acknowledge luck, though. I think it's one of those weird topics that people feel like they can't acknowledge or shouldn't acknowledge that is somehow cheating. But I think it plays a role in everyone's life, of course. When you did your ad with Currys, did that start something off as a? Because I don't know quite how it works. Because obviously we're picturing a life or a career that's very far away from, say, a 9-to-5 office gig. But do you have like different layers of work? So you started having opportunities to do ads. Was that something that then enabled you to then do your own writing and your own acting elsewhere, or was advertising something actually you thought, I'm enjoying this and I can do more of this?
To be honest, it seemed to me like a fun and easy way to make money and give myself enough time to carry on doing the other stuff. Really, that's the honest the honest answer for sure. And slowly over time, my agent started to put me up for roles on TV and in films, and I was a bit kind of, are you sure about that? Because I feel like I can do the advertising thing. I feel like I'm doing okay there, but I'm still not sure, an actor's actual, script with kind of emotional depth or whatever. I'm still not entirely convinced I can pull that off. And she was really, it was kind of her really kind of pushed me that way. Because to be honest, I was really quite happy doing the adverts and carrying on writing. And then kind of what shifted, I guess, is as I did more TV work, I got to meet actors and cinematographers and sound recordists, to the extent that then I began to think, well, hang on, can I start making my own films now with the contacts that I've made here and the experience that I've gained? And I slowly the theatre thing receded into the background, and I started to still, basically, it was still kind of the same working model. It was, if I can earn the money here, I can carry on doing the writing or what became directing ultimately as well. Over here, it was, one kind of supplemented the other, but the one that was doing the supplementing was also really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It was like a win-win, really.
And I suppose, this could be something that people in advertising like me tell ourselves to make it out like we're not just frustrated artists in some instances, but you've got, you mentioned Rowan Atkinson earlier. I'm not going to mention why again necessarily, but
no, please.
But with Rowan Atkinson, I'm sure you'll remember his Barclaycard ads that he did, which was kind of the start of a character he then took into film. And so there are adverts that do become these, they kind of bleed into culture, don't they? You've got a few. I've mentioned 118 Runners already.
Yep.
Do you have any kind of level of enjoyment or satisfaction from that? Or is it really different to when you act on stage or on screen?
It's interesting you mentioned that Barclaycard's advert, because I would actually argue that the actual adverts are better than either of the films that he made based on that character. And I'm thinking also of Ted Lasso. They were originally commercials, weren't they? I don't know if you've ever really seen those. They're brilliant. Those original commercials the show is very good as well, but the commercials, again, arguably better than the show, I would say. So look, for sure, there have been some ads I've done that have been really fulfilling, and the 118 ones would definitely be up there. And you're right, they crossed over into popular culture. Whereas look, I don't know, I wouldn't put a statistic on it, but probably most of the commercials I did were kind of but just would just basically I did it for the paycheck, and I think I have this kind of slightly concern, I'm being too blunt about this, but I sometimes think when I watch actors that I know or respect in an advert, I'm always more forgiving, because I think, well, you've probably done that for the money. Fair enough. We all, you need to pay bills, etc., etc. Whereas if you're seen in a bad piece of TV or drama, you have to assume that they've read the script and thought that it was good. And it's like, well, why did you do that? That was awful. At least you did that, which was maybe not great as well, but you got paid nicely. So, some acts, it's a totally a mixed bag, and there are definitely some adverts that I'm really proud of, and some great people who worked on those ads with me. Some of whom, here's a nice story. I did a commercial for AIB Bank in Ireland. And it was a Christmas ad, and it ended up running for, I think, at least 2 or 3 years consecutively in the end. And I used to get recognised for this advert by any Irish people who were in London, often on the tube. They would say, "Are you the guy from the AIB Bank commercial?" And it was only Irish people who knew this advert, but it was obviously like a big favourite over there. And I then, many years later, I did. There's a film called Lockout, which has got Guy Pearce in it, Mike from Neighbours to a certain generation. It's a sci-fi film set on a prison orbiting around the Earth, and I was asked if I would want to do this film, this lockout film, and I was like, well, yeah, all right. So I like a bit of sci-fi. Is there a script? Do they want me to audition? It's like, no, it's an offer. I'm like, you what? They don't want me to audition. No, it's a straight offer for this feature film, which is not, that does not happen to me very often at all, if ever. And I was really confused by this. I was like, it's got Guy Pearce in it, right? And Luc Besson is the executive producer. They don't want me to audition. No, Tim, they really don't. It's an offer. Do you want to do it? Well, I mean, obviously, yes, let's do it. And we were filming in Serbia. And I arrived in Serbia still kind of thinking, is this some elaborate, joke? What's going on here? Have they got the right guy? I mean, is it some other Tim they were after? I'll play it cool. And I got into the studios, and into the room came this Irish cinematographer, James Mathey, and it's like, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm one of the co-writers on the film. I said, what? But I thought you were a cinematographer. And he had worked on this AIB bank commercial with me. And I'd got on well with him. We'd chatted, and apparently he was a writer as well. I didn't know that. And he had written this part with me in mind, and convinced Luc Besson that, he didn't need to see anybody else for the part. So it's all right, I've got this guy. He did a commercial for a bank that I did years ago. It'll be fine. It'll be perfect. Perfect foil for Guy Pearce. So, that's a nice story of doing an advert that led to something quite magical.
You landed in Serbia before you discovered that link.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Seriously, I'm at the studios in Serbia, still not quite sure how I got this part until he walked in the door. And it took me a moment to kind of place him as well, because it had been a while ago, and I didn't expect, whenever I'd seen him before, he'd had a camera on his shoulder as well. So, but yeah, that's a true story.
That's amazing. How does that differ to getting the role in, say, Afterlife?
Well, again, what we're talking about here is I just said that this does not happen to me, kind of getting straight offers for jobs. But Afterlife is actually another example of that happening. And my mother-in-law likes to tell this story, that I'd been told to go. It was a new Ricky Gervais series. They sent me the scripts, and I had an audition to go to. It was not in the normal places. It was at Ricky's offices in Hampstead. Here's the address. You need to buzz this bell and, call up and they'll let you in. And so I went along there, and I thought I was going for an audition for this part. And when I got there, I walked into this room, and there were lots of people sat around in a circle, and it was Ricky, and it was Diane Morgan was there, and Tony Way, and basically the cast of Afterlife was sat in a circle reading the script. And I was shown a seat to sit in, and they were reading the script through, and it got to the scene with, I think it must have been not the first scene with my character, with Julian M, but maybe one of the scenes when he sat talking to Ricky, and I was just expected to read in when it got to that part of the script. And we did it, and Ricky turned to the producer and said, "See, I told you it'd be perfect for this." And I came out of there and called my mother-in-law, who was looking after my baby daughter at the time, and I said, I think I'm in it. I think I'm in the show, but I'm not for sure. It didn't feel like an audition. It felt like a read-through, because all the other cast were there. And so I rang my agent, and she was like, "Oh, I thought it was an audition." I said, well, it really didn't feel like one. It felt like that. Can you check? And so that was something which, again, Ricky had. I don't know if he'd written that part with me in mind, but he definitely, thought that I could do it. And that, I think, the story of that, though, to kind of give its full explanation, is 15, however many years previously to that, I had met Ricky at an audition for a show which nobody had heard of called The Office. And I went back and had a recall for The Office. And then I went back, I think, a third time, and I was told it's between you and one other guy for the role of Gareth. And I remember sitting at BBC TV Centre, as it was then, the old wood-panelled BBC TV Centre, and looking around the room thinking, wow, it's me and one other guy. And looking across the room, and sat over the other side of the room was Mackenzie Crook. And I was like, oh, that's that Mackenzie Crook guy. He'd been on a show called The 11 O'Clock Show, so I was aware of his face, and I thought, he must be up for Gareth as well. Oh, great. I've got this. I'm better than him. I've got this. And history records it somewhat differently. So yeah, Mackenzie got that, but I think that's how arrogant I used to be. But that's maybe a good thing. I was very confident back then with my abilities. But the story that I was told is that Ricky wanted me and Stephen Merchant wanted Mackenzie, or maybe it was the other way around. I can't remember now, but it was kind of, ultimately Mackenzie got that gig. But I think I had stayed in Ricky's thoughts all that time. And then, ultimately, although it was like 15, 16 years later, it was worth the wait, because, it was a great part that I had.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Arguably the thing I'm most proud of, probably.
Because the show feels so brilliantly British for various reasons. And I don't know, I want to ask you this, but I don't know if it's a bit of a stretch that I'm making here, because I mentioned in the intro that you like the weird and enduring folk customs.
Yeah.
This funny island we live in, and it's led to the wonderful work of the Way of the Morris, which again, hopefully we'll get into in a bit more detail soon too. Afterlife is also full of weird and enduring folk. I mean, the cast is outstanding. And I think there's something, maybe it's weird and enduring with the way that British people grieve versus other cultures. Is there any similarities there in terms of that and the main thread of Afterlife and what you're interested in your own documentaries and work?
Yeah, I've never really thought about that, I don't think, Giles, about whether they do tread, on similar ground. I mean, they're definitely, the idea of Englishness, and let's say that rather than Britishness. The idea of Englishness is a tricky subject matter, for sure, and it's and it's fraught with dangers as well, historical dangers and contemporary dangers, I think. But in terms of Ricky kind of doubling down on something that looks, smells, and tastes English. For sure, the Afterlife is very much that, and maybe that it's one of the reasons why it's been such a global success. I think I don't know. You can try and run the figures on these things to work out why it's been such a massive success all over the world, and maybe that is because people get a sense, a flavour, a slice of England from watching it, but also not a kind of Richard Curtis slice of England either. It just feels a bit more earthy, probably, and a bit more fragile and broken.
Yeah, I think that's probably why I enjoyed it so much. And in terms of a success, you're right. I think it's either 2 or 3 years running. It's been the most viewed Netflix comedy series.
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. And it's also interesting that it follows the kind of old English sitcom structure of only 6 episodes. Each I won't say season. Each series is only 6 episodes, which is a real anomaly in today's TV, particularly on a streaming service. I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine Ricky had to kind of fight to a certain degree to say, well, no, it's only 6. Because, the Americans, for instance, are definitely not used to something being as short as that. But then what you end up being able to do with something like that is, well, I can do 6. If you want more than that, you're going to have to get a team of writers in. And at that point, does it kind of lose its, identity to some degree? It's not going to be all written by Ricky Gervais if you do that. There's no way I can write 12 episodes. Yeah. Do 6. Ricky has always, in my experience of working with him and not working with him, has always stuck to his guns about the way he wanted to do stuff. And I think that stems from getting into it a bit later in life. Because, the story goes that, The Office was the BBC were not sure about The Office. They basically said, we'll make it, but Ricky, you can't be in it because you've never done TV before. And you and Stephen definitely can't direct it because you've never directed TV before. And they basically said to the BBC, okay, we won't do it then. Which I don't think anybody had ever said that to them before. But they were like, yeah, well, we want to do it this way. We'll direct it and Ricky's in it. Or we just won't do it. I'm just going to do something else. And I think, he was probably, the same thing with Afterlife to some degree. I want to do it this way. And I've actually earned the right to do it that way as well. So,
Yeah, hats off for doing it when maybe it didn't carry as much weight as it would do now.
For sure. And, the other thing is there's a very obvious reason why a lot of Afterlife is set in, well, it's not set, but it's filmed in Hampstead. It's because that's where Ricky lives, and it meant that he got to get up a bit later, and he used to go home for lunch and come back in his shorts in the afternoon. He must come back in his shorts. I've had a shower. He said, well, a shower. Put the shorts on. I've scheduled it so I'm not in any scenes in the afternoon. Let's have some fun.
I'll write it that way. Was it fun? It looked like it must have been fun.
So, so much fun. It did, obviously my part is not necessarily a fun part, but it was definitely fun to do and a fun set to be on. And Ricky is a bit like a child in a sweet shop, which is so sweet. He's still kind of so much in love with the idea that, wow, you sometimes look at the monitor and go, oh my God, that looks brilliant. It looks like a proper TV show. Wow. It looks excellent. Brilliant. Have you done that? That's the lighting, is it? It's excellent. All right, yeah. What are the lines again? And you just go and, you would never overshoot stuff. Ricky directs, in my experience, he directs from within the scene. There's not a lot of notes or direction, if you like, before you do the scene. Particularly the scenes I'm in with him. He's in that scene with you, and you're taking your kind of your tone from him, if you like. And obviously the show has had an immense amount of critical success and feedback, but I think one of the things that often doesn't get talked about is quite how good Ricky is in it. I think he's brilliant in it. It's such a strong, measured performance, and I'm not sure he always gets enough credit for the acting that he does in it. He's in most of it. There's nowhere to hide in that performance, and yeah, he's
I've never thought of.
Hats off to the fella. Hats off to a Redding there.
Exactly that. I'd never thought about that actually, but I can think of very few scenes that he's not in. Is he in all?
He's in most. He's in most of it. So that in itself that's hard work. if you're and he's responsible for every, he's written it, he's directed it. It's it's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. Again, to his credit, he was that cackle with the teeth showing, was very visible, all day, every day. It's, he hasn't lost that. It's still fun for him. He enjoys going to work and making TV,
I want to ask, we've got listener questions to get onto, so I'm slightly mindful of the time.
Yes.
I did want to ask about what's next for you, because I heard rumours of a career pivot of sorts.
I've always tried to do more than one thing, if you like, as we've talked about, acting and filmmaking and documentary making, and I've made short films, and I just, I feel like, I have dallianced with the advertising world over those years, mainly from doing stuff in front of the camera, but also I've made test commercials and promos and things, but it's not something I've ever really felt able to fully commit to. So it's kind of where I think, and I know you've had a lot of guests on recently who've talked about the kind of the pandemic and the opportunity the positive, if you like, opportunity it gave people to put a pause on things and to maybe kind of rethink things and change tact if possible. And I think so it stems there, this idea that I've been doing this for a long time now, and is there a way that I can use the skill set that I've learned over the years, doing advertising, from doing TV, from doing film, from writing plays, is there a way I can bring that with me into the advertising world or the business world? Are there other avenues that I can be exploring here? I feel kind of energized in a way to maybe start, a new phase of my career, whatever that might be. That word career is kind of, I think actors often consider that a dirty word, but it feels like I don't kind of quite know what it might be or what form it might take. Answers on a postcard, please. But it feels like I feel ready to commit maybe to something else, because I think these things can work both ways. Is there something that I have learned on the set of Game of Thrones, that I can bring to a commercial for a betting agency, but likewise, is there something that I've learned on the set of an advert for a betting agency that I can take with me back into film or TV or documentary or something? I feel like, I've always had a number of hats that I can kind of freely take off and put on, and they've always kind of cross-fertilized each other in my experience. I've never kind of really tried to explore doing it in the advertising or business world.
Well, I think you're right in terms of wearing all those hats, and maybe it's just a case of wearing one a bit more intentionally than in the past. But certainly in my experience, and we were talking about how you found in your early days, how you found the right path. And the point that I think is consistently true is that the most talented people I tend to come across in my own life outside of this is these people tend to have taken a scenic route. And to quote, I've loved this quote because it's a very clumsy quote which feels comfortable for me to say. There's a quote from Dave Trott, which is, the most interesting people know a lot of stuff about stuff. And I think the experiences that you have and the worlds that you've walked in with significant overlaps into the advertising and creative worlds, that's certainly true.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of listener questions for you, Tim.
I'm grateful you got any. It's nice.
Time, weather, and...
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host Giles Edwards on 01189 952 007. Only the other day, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on strategy and brand identity. But we're not asking you to do that. Nope. Anyway, back to the show.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
Ooh, yeah, of course you didn't, Bill.
So asking the
Here we
general
go.
public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. We've got two, starting with Greg. Greg asks, you've made documentaries about Morris dancers and folk singing, but if you could make a documentary about anything in the world and money were no object, what would it be and why?
I mean, there's always peculiarities to explore for sure. It's interesting to kind of, because I've always got kind of projects on the go. So my initial thought is, you know, if money was no object, which of those would I put that money into making? Which is kind of where my head's at with it. And so it's just not kind of necessarily answering Greg's question exactly, but there's a film that I'm working on at the moment, which is it's a kind of attempt to tie a lot of these curious British English customs together. It's a film about a folklorist called Doc Rowe, who's basically spent his whole life, or certainly the last 50 years, travelling the length and breadth of the country, documenting strange, weird and wonderful folk customs. And he has this massive archive of material up in Whitby in Yorkshire. And so me and Rob Curry, who I mentioned earlier, we spent a calendar year traveling around with Doc to a lot of these events, which I'd heard about but had never been to. So it was an excuse as well to finally get to go to some of them, kind of on Doc's coattails, if you like. And so we're making a film about him and about the customs that he visits and has. I mean, he goes to these things, you know, year in, year out, and has done for 50 years. He's got 50 years worth of footage of the same thing. It's like it's a national treasure. This stuff he has, and it needs to be. So on one level, the film is about making that clear that this stuff needs to be protected. Doc is in his how old is he now? Mid-70s, Doc. So he's very aware that when he isn't here anymore, where does this stuff go? It's arguably of not just national but global importance. This stuff in terms of its documentation of these things, which are deep. Without getting into specifics of each one, they're deeply fascinating. That they still exist in this tiny little island that we live on. There are more folk customs surviving than I think anywhere else in Europe. Europe has some amazing ones as well, for sure. But in terms of the kind of depth and wealth of them, England, Britain just seems to, there's just so many of them. I'm still finding ones out like every week. There's one that I've never heard of. And it goes on, once every 11 years in this village somewhere outside, I don't know, in Staffordshire somewhere, and they're all local and have, been kept going by the passion that people have for these things. It's basically this invisible side of England. I feel that most people are not aware of, and it goes on most weekends. There'll be something going on somewhere which can trace its roots back hundreds of years, and there's a reason why it's survived. And people still do it. And it might not be the same reason they do it now that they did 400 years ago, but it still means something to those people in that community to do it. And I think there's something about the fact that most, if not all of these customs come from a working class background. It's people expressing something about themselves. They're allowed to do it one day of the year. They're kind of allowed to take back what is theirs on their streets. you know. And so there's a kind of fierce pride about these things. I think that I just find deeply fascinating, and they're not interested in when they're purists. They're not even interested in who's come to see it. You know, the audience. These things do gather quite a crowd of people, but they're not doing it for the crowd. They're doing it for them. And there's a reason why they do it. And there's a reason, you know, that connects to myself and the Morris dancing film that I made, Way of the Morris. In the course of that film, I end up going from a non-believer or a non-dancer to somebody who dances the Morris. And it's something that I still do to this day. You know, it's for those who have seen the film or might see the film in the future after listening to this. You know, it's not art. I'm kind of giving away the end of the film, but it's not artifice for the sake of the film that I end up dancing. It's something that profoundly I felt I needed to do, and it's something which I've continued to do since.
Because in the first ad, there's a clip of you being asked if you're going to dance, and you categorically refused. But I must just quickly say, in one of the other trailers, I think it's the second trailer, there's a brilliant voiceover, and I don't actually know if I'm honest, Tim, if it's you or someone else. I assume it's someone else who quite crudely says, on Morris dancing specifically, you've got to ask yourself, what's going on there? And it's just such a lovely line, and I suspect that's what most people think when they see Morris dancing, if they haven't watched Way of the Morris, of course. But it is deeply interesting, and it's amazing how deep the roots are.
It's so much more deep and much more interesting than most people give it credit for. You know, it's become Morris. The main reason I kind of wanted to make that film about Morris dancing in a way was because it felt like a poisoned chalice, if you like. You know, it was like, how are you going to do this? You know, because everyone's just laughing at this thing. And it strikes me that Morris dancing has become a punchline to a joke, national joke, that nobody can remember the setup to. It's just, if you say Morris dancing, there's just a laugh. People will just laugh. It doesn't matter what the context is. It's like those two words together instantly guffaws. And I grew up around Morris dancing. I grew up in a village where it was, you know, a very prominent part of village life, but I had always shunned it. Never wanted to do it. Moved to London, never talked about it, was embarrassed about it. It's my roots. And I mean, my route into wanting to connect with Morris dancing comes from living in London in a multicultural city and having friends who are not, certainly not from, you know, the countryside in England, and whose heritage is, you know, from elsewhere, not from these Sceptred Isles, kind of interested in it, kind of saying, what is this Morris dancing? I've never seen it. Tell me about it. You know, so it's through other people's interest and other people's eyes, I was able to kind of reassess what this thing is, because I was as guilty as anybody of just thinking it was a joke, you know, and something to be embarrassed.
I like the idea that you saw it as a poison chalice, because people dismiss it as such a, you know, silly, I suppose, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Because they don't understand it.
I did. I really wanted to kind of confront it, and I knew it was potentially, you know, dodgy, sticky wicket to be messing around on. But that's kind of why I wanted to do it, really, and give it some gravitas, some depth, and you know, there's a very personal story attached to it as well, which, if you watch the film, that really happened to me. The kind of revelation as to why it was such a big deal in my village, and it basically is connections to the horrors of the First World War, which, when I found out that part of the history of Morris dancing, it just fundamentally changed everything for me. And I think that, to be fair, the reason why most people laugh at Morris dancing is, you know, the stereotypical image of a beer-bellied man in his 50s dancing around some handkerchiefs. The reason why that's become the stereotype is that there was a massive revival in folk customs, folk music, Morris dancing in the early to mid 70s. And so the people who were involved in reviving Morris dancing at that time are now that age. But if you go back and watch, and I have footage of this in Where the Morris, I've got Super 8 footage of them back in the early 70s, when they're 20, 21 years old, it just looks different. It's not old men prancing around. It's like virile young long hairs with big, they look like the Beatles crossing Abbey Road, except they got sticks in their hands and baldricks. And when they jump, they get up pretty high. And it just looks different. So that's part of the problem. And actually, Morris dancing is actually going through a real kind of renaissance at the moment. There's a lot of women's teams that have come through in the last 10 years, and that's kind of changing the landscape a lot. So, yeah, it's, you know.
Did it travel well? What did people overseas think of it? Any other audience?
Amazingly well, Giles. Amazingly well. The Americans in particular seem to love it. We premiered at South by Southwest in Texas in 2011, and I got to take my uncle and my dad with me, who were both in the film and who were both former Morris dancers. And just the idea that we were in Texas with a film that, you know, we had made for very little money, and nobody had asked us to make this film, was being shown, you know, at this prestigious film festival. Still tickles me to this day that even happened. And then it did really well. The Guardian heralded it as one of like the British breakthrough films of the festival. I was championed as one of the new faces of British film, alongside, shall we say, in that same article, the other people they're talking about are Ben Wheatley, Adam, I'm trying to get his name right, from Adam and Joe, Adam Cornish. Yeah. Not Joe. No, Joe Cornish, not Adam. It's Adam Buxton. I knew I was going to do that wrong. Yeah. But Joe Cornish, a brilliant documentary filmmaker called Jeannie Finley, who made a great documentary about the last season of Game of Thrones called The Last Watch, which is brilliant. So Jeannie was in that list, and then the other person in that list was David Bowie's son, Duncan Jones. So, you know, it's quite prestigious company. And not only that, but it was a film about Morris dancing.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. Lest we not forget.
Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating. Well, we're going to link to that. I'm going to link to Ballad of Shirley Collins. And we're going to link to all of your ads and everything we can find. To be honest, it'll be in this episode's show notes. The second question it seems very appropriate given
that was a long answer to Greg's question, wasn't it? I'm not even sure it was an answer. But anyway, sorry, what's the second question?
That's a good thing. Greg's got his money's worth. Given your career pivot, this feels very appropriate. So this question is from Sunita, who asks, if you could lend any wisdom from the world of playwriting to any copywriters listening on how to write good stuff, what would it be?
Cool. It's been a long time since I actually wrote any theatre, but I think I would say the overwrite everything, and then whittle it down. I used to, when I was writing a play, and it's been a while since I wrote one, I would just put so much stuff down. I kind of began to describe it like making, I don't know, like a gumbo or a bouillabaisse, one of those big kind of stews where let's get everything in. Let's get everything in here. Let's get it all in the pot. And then we're going to slowly boil this down until we've got the essence of it. But it's going to take a little while, and we might not ultimately won't maybe even need some of these ingredients. The metaphor breaks down then because you can't take the ingredient out of the soup or the stew. But just that idea of just stick it all in there to begin with, and just let it bubble and boil and simmer, and then, you know, ultimately you'll get the essence. So my plays would start off first draft would be completely unwieldy. 5 hours. You'd have to try and knock it down. I mean, one of the advantages of being a playwright, or certainly in the way I was, in that I ran a theatre company as well, is that I was always able to then kind of do that with the actors. That was always my favourite bit, was like, I would bring stuff in and we would workshop it with the actors, you know, and from there you would be able to kind of take the edges off and kind of find what was working.
Would you do that via performance as well, so you could see how it performed and then tweak it as you went?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the most stupid things I probably ever did in my life was we booked a slot at the Edinburgh Festival in '96, I think it was, with a show that I hadn't written. And paid for it with money we didn't have, and then kind of had to retrofit back from there to think, well, okay, we need to start rehearsing there, so that means you have to have the script by then, Tim. Yeah, is that going to work? Well, I'll have to, won't it? So yeah, I mean, I think I had half a play ready at the start of rehearsals, and I would be bringing stuff in to, you know, every day, and we would workshop stuff and see what was working in it, and we got away with it by the skin of our teeth. But also, you know, there was a very real reason for doing it. There was deadlines. I'm sure everyone always says this, but deadlines, you know, ultimately so important. If you put a line in the sand, you know, so it's got to be done by then, and that goes way back, you know, to doing essays you didn't want to do at school, you know. But if there is a line in the sand, you'll do it. You'll get something. You have to have that. And I think if there isn't a deadline, it can be really tricky. That's something I think I struggle with at the moment, with, you know, wanting to write screenplays for feature films, you know, without any kind of guarantee that it will ever get made. I find it very difficult to motivate myself. So I would always look for deadlines. In fact, when I won the National Student Playwright of the Year award, that was mainly to do with, there was a competition, there was a deadline for the script to be delivered by, and I thought, well, that's a good thing. That gives me a reason to do this, and also a deadline to finish it by. So there was definitely a period in my life back then when I would look for things like that. And obviously, if you're writing copy, then you will definitely have a deadline for that as well. But yeah, just throw it all in there. That's the same with documentaries, really, as well, Giles. You know, it's a big difference, I guess, between shooting a narrative piece from a script, which I've done, to, you know, what I'm do more of now, which is making a documentary where you overshoot to then find the narrative in the edit. You know, the edit is where you do the writing. I consider that writing now. So when people say, do you still write? I say, well, I do, but I do more editing now, but that's a form of writing.
I was going to actually expand Sunita's question before her, or AKA get another similar question in.
Yeah.
Partly because I imagine a lot of the value that you could lend the industry also stems from the films and the stuff you've done on screen. So we've already talked about Afterlife.
Yeah.
And I suspect the way that Afterlife was directed was a lot more relaxed than Game of Thrones, which I have to bring up because I think some of our listeners would be a bit pissed off with me, and I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't talk about the Red Wedding.
Yes.
That famous scene. But from what I understand of how that was directed, it was very, very different. And I'm not saying that Afterlife was any lesser because it was more relaxed. Can you talk a bit more about that difference and how that played out for the Red Wedding?
For sure. I mean, I like to think that, you know, I've worked on, you know, all levels of kind of film sets, from, you know, no budget shorts, to, you know, idents, through to TV, through to, you know, Game of Thrones, which is probably the kind of pinnacle in terms of how massive that show is and was at the time. That it'd already grown into like the beast that we all know it as now. And, you know, it was a well-oiled machine, and yeah, much really, you know, quite different from Afterlife, which, you know, I said was quite relaxed, and that came from Ricky. But Game of Thrones was very different, much more intense. lot riding on it, and something that I've not really experienced anywhere else is that you would rehearse the day before you filmed. So, much more like theatre. And people will always tell you they don't have time or budget to do this on a film or TV show. But with Game of Thrones, you came in the day before you were to shoot. You would rehearse the scene, but you would rehearse it as much for the technical aspects as you would for the acting aspects. In fact, it was more for the technical aspects than the acting, if you like, just so that they could work out all the camera angles, how, a big scene was going to play out, if there were special effects, whatever, so that on the day you came into film, it was pretty well oiled and very, very intensively shot. Lots and lots of coverage to the extent that you get to a point where you've said the lines so many times, you just not even, you don't know what you're saying anymore. They're just kind of words dripping out of your mouth. And the red wedding scene in itself took a full week to shoot. Various stages. The downside of that is that on the first day, there's this beautiful banquet going on with real food on the table, including fish. And by the end of the week, that food is still on that table, and that fish is not smelling very nice by now. So it was quite a honk by the final day of filming. But what they did with that scene, and I've told this story before, I'm sure, but what they did do, and this was to the benefit of the actors involved, particularly Michelle, who played Cat, and Richard Madden, who was playing your Stark man. They did shoot it in chronological order, which is obviously not always what you do, but in terms of them and their kind of emotional arc, they shot the whole stuff chronologically, so that when I slit Cat's throat at the end, that is Michelle's last moment on Game of Thrones. She knows that there's no more after this. So you get what you get there cleverly as a producer director. You know that you can tap into the emotion that she must be experiencing there, as well as the character. She can put that into the character. Because you're not going to then go back and do the beginning of the scene. We've been through the scene and we'll leave. That was the last thing that we shot, was the throat slit and her dropping out of frame. And it was a very genuinely really powerful moment to be a part of, because I was aware of it being Michelle's last moment as well. All I remember feeling at the time was, don't you be the one that messes this up, Tim. There's so many moving parts here. This is such a big deal. All you've got to do is walk into frame, put that knife where it needs to be, and pull it across the throat, and then get out of there. Don't trip over anything.
Don't start Morris dancing.
Exactly. Whatever you do, don't put a little a caper in there, and don't get your hankies out, Tim. Keep those in your pocket. And I think, it shows that when I watched that scene myself back, even though I knew it was going to happen, even though I'd been there that whole week and part of that scene, when I finally saw it on screen, it blew me away as well. It was really, really, really powerful. I think it transmitted the energy on set, transmitted through the screen to the audience.
Yeah. It must give you so much pleasure, not going to sound perverse given the throat slitting incident itself, but it must give you so much pleasure to have been such a significant part of such a significant scene of such a significant show. I mean, it was just, I'm a big fan of Viz, Tim, and I saw a brilliant Viz top tip, which was prepare your children for Game of Thrones by simply writing "and then he dies" at the end of all of their Mr. Men books. Because it's just the unpredictable nature of it. It was just just hadn't seen anything like that before when nobody was safe.
Nobody is safe. I know that's absolutely its strength. Because I started watching it when it first came on, and I didn't kind of go with it. I remember watching the first one and then thinking, yeah, that's all right. It was fine, but I didn't carry on watching it. And friends did. And they said, "Did you carry on watching that Game of Thrones thing?" And I said, I didn't actually. And they said, "You know what happens at the end of the first series? They kill Sean Bean." Yeah. I'm like, what? What, the main character? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, that sounds interesting. Okay, I'll go back and watch it. So you're right. You know, that kind of no one is safe ethos is just absolutely baked into that show. And I think that is why people loved it so much. I mean, for me, somebody of my generation, and again, this actually goes back to one of my short films that I made. There was a sci-fi show called Blake 7 in the late 70s, early 80s, and again, without ruining it, that they die at the end. And I was 11, sat there, and again, remember, this is a different time of watching television. You're not watching it on catch-up or streaming it. It's on the BBC at that time on that day, and you sit there as, you know, en masse throughout the country and watch it together, and they all die at the end. And I can remember turning to my dad and thinking, what is going, Dad, I've never seen this before. And it was like the end of for me again, I'm the right age to have seen Empire Strikes Back in the cinema. You know, the end of that, it's like, are you serious? I've not seen this before. Why is Han Solo in carbon? What, is his hands off? He's lost his hand and he's in carbon. Dad! Ask us aloud.
But no, that's definitely one of the qualities.
But yeah, even on Game of Thrones, there were very different styles of directing, but very different scenes. My first scene on Game of Thrones was just quite a kind of solid scene with lots of people sat around a table, and each of us kind of had our turn with the camera on us, and it slowly went around the table, and I was the last one to be shot out of everyone. And the director was really calm, come in between takes and whisper things in people's ears, and I had no idea what notes they were being given until it was my turn. And then he would come in after every take and kind of just give you a little notice to do the scene in a different way. And then I'll always remember this. I don't know, we did about 7 or 8 takes. Came in after that, crouched down next to me and said, "Okay, we've got all of those. They're all great. Let's do one more, however you want to do it." And I loved that. I have no idea if any of that take is in the finished scene or not, but just being given that opportunity as an actor on such a big show was lovely. And I realised then that he'd been doing that to everybody. So there was him, but then on the Red Wedding, which is obviously quite a very different scene, there was an American director on that whose name I'll never forget because it's David Nutter. And he was basically behind the camera, energized, like shouting things like "stab and kill and stab and kill and kill and stab and stab and kill and kill and stab and stab and stab." Just insane. This man was insane and well up for it. And he could never remember my name, which he just kept calling me Buddy all the time. "Okay, Buddy, you come in, Buddy, you come in, and you slit the throat. Okay, Buddy, okay, Buddy, in you come." And then, yeah, he was just a force of nature, that guy. Yeah, he's done a lot of good stuff, David Nutter.
Is there an official number for how many people were killed at the Red Wedding?
I don't think so. Not that I've seen.
That's what asked David Nutter.
Nutter will know. I mean, if anyone knows, Nutter will know. That should be a phrase. If anyone knows, Nutter knows.
Oh, that's brilliant. Right then, Tim, I suppose we better do the final 4 pertinent poses that we put to all of our guests, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I don't know, just something simple. I think, like, keep dreaming, keep believing it'll be worth it, mostly. Keep stealing those comics, Also, I would say try spicy food earlier, because you will love it. I know you don't think you will, but you ultimately will. I was well into my 20s.
We're 20.
Oh, I was well in my 20s before I had a proper curry. Yeah, my friends at college will always joke about that. In our first year at college, we went out for somebody's birthday. We went to a curry house, and I had chicken and chips. Shameful.
Have you been making up for it ever since?
I have tried to. Yeah.
Nice. I'm interested in what number 2 will be, because obviously we get a lot of the same things given our marketing industry focus. But if you could banish one thing from your industry, what would it be and why?
I'm slightly worried about this one, because actors are notorious for whinging anyway. But to some degree, I would say castings.
Right.
And Afterlife is an example of that. There was a casting director on Afterlife, absolutely, but a lot of the castings were made basically because Ricky watches TV, and he knows who he likes. Should we offer it to them? And I think there could be more of that, just in terms of people have more of an idea about who's out there, and people have show reels. And there's sometimes, it feels to me, too many hoops to jump through to kind of get a part sometimes, when it's, you can tell if that person will be right for it or not. And I certainly had that experience when I made my short films. It was, should we ask them? They'd be great. I know what they can do. That'll work. I don't need to read for it, audition for it, just see if they're available. And I think when you get offered jobs like that, in my experience, it gives you such a lift as an actor as well, to just be asked to come and do something based on past merits, and I think I don't know, I feel like, I certainly don't think it makes you do a worse job, and I would argue that sometimes it makes you do a better job. You feel, it kind of pumps you up, you come on to set, well up for it.
Yeah, there's parallel there definitely with pitching in our industry, just all the free pitches that are often expected.
Yeah,
it's not a game that every agency plays, and we tend not to ourselves. But that we have to be. I say that knowing that in the future that might have to change depending on opportunities and cash flow and so on and so forth. So yeah, that makes complete sense. And you're right. If you're awarded work without having to pitch, it does have it holds a lot more significance. And I think just from a psychological perspective, it's going to motivate you in a way that it wouldn't if you'd had to jump through hoops.
I mean, for sure. I think it does, and I think, trusting in what somebody can do. But yeah, I understand why it's not like that as well. Sure. Well, I mean, we're talking about other things we could banish. In terms of my experience of working in advertising and commercials, one thing that is always kind of, and there'll be reasons for this, and you may be able to tell me, is, there just always seems to be just ridiculously short lead-in times for the shoots. Because I know it takes a long time from pitch to, writing the scripts to, assembling the pitches from the directors, how much work and time goes into, getting all of that side of it ready. And then it's like, right, when are we shooting? In 2 days' time. Should we cast it then? Well, why is that bit left? It seems to me like no time whatsoever. Are you available tomorrow to fly to Cape Town? Possibly. Yeah, possibly. Okay, but why didn't you ask me like a month ago? I've got a diary. We both got diaries, right? Well, when are you thinking of doing it? I'll put it in the diary. It's fine. It's in there. That's happening. You have to leave it to it just seems like it just causes so much stress and so many ulcers for so many people, that it always gets left to the last minute. I've never really understood that. Although, to be honest, some of the adverts I've been seen for kind of back end of this year, last year and this year seem to have a bit more, it's not filming until next month. Oh, great. All right. Fine. That's nice. No stress. So I don't know if that's changing, but it always seemed very kick bollock scramble.
Yeah, I was not surprised to hear you say that, but I don't have any. I don't have any answer that's vaguely acceptable as an answer, I suppose. As to why that might be. Fingers crossed, this is the sign of that changing. I don't know if you're a reader. You a reader, Tim? Are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
But for sure. I'm a slow reader, but voracious. I'm a voraciously slow reader, Giles. But I mean, I thought about this, and none of these are necessarily. Well, they're not advertising or marketing books, but the reason that I've chosen these is because I think they're all books that will forever change the way in which you look at the world. One of them is by my favourite filmmaker, Werner Herzog. There's a book of interviews with him called Herzog on Herzog, which I've got, but I believe there's an expanded, repackaged version of this book called A Guide for the Perplexed.
Oh, okay.
And it's basically just a series of interviews with Werner. And if I look at which I've actually got by my side here, if I look at my copy of it, my dog-eared copy of it, it's just got bits underlined everywhere, little post-it notes just throughout, with just moments of madness, wisdom. It's probably the funniest book I've ever read. I just find him hilarious, Herzog. And it just starts off with a quote from Conrad Hilton about, if there's one thing you could pass on to posterity, Herzog says, well, Conrad Hilton said, whenever you take a shower, always make sure the curtain is inside the tub. That's it. Always put the curtain inside the tub. You don't need anything more than that.
Yep.
As far as Werner's concerned. If you do that, get that bit right, everything else will fall into place. So there's that. There's a number of Herzog books. There's another book about when he made Fitzcarraldo in the jungle with Kinski, which is also just hilarious and mad. I'm currently reading a book called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, which is by Annie Dillard, one of the Pulitzer Prize in the 70s, and it's considered by many to be the holy grail of nature writing. So I've just started reading that, and I'm wanting to read that for a long time. I would also recommend a book by a chap called Nick Hayes, which is a charmingly radical book called The Book of Trespass, which came out a couple of years ago, and I can't recommend this one highly enough, really. It's like passionate, provocative, illuminating, quite a strong Berkshire narrative too, as well, for people of a Reading persuasion like self. And it's basically about the history of land rights in this country. And actually, Nick's somebody else that I've been hoping to make a film with at some point. And Nick is a big part of the Right to Roam campaign, which have been in the news recently over the change to wild camping rights on Dartmoor. So it's an amazing book. It's genuinely changed the way that I look at the English countryside from reading that book. It made me very angry as well, actually, about certain things. Statistically, it's something crazy, like 92% of the land is kind of off limits to the commoners of this country. 92% we're not allowed to go on its own privately. Only getting worse, all of that stuff. So that's great. And there's another book that Nick did called The Trespasser's Companion, which is equally brilliant, but that one's got more of his illustrations in it. He's an amazing illustrator as well, Nick. And what else it's not too weird to recommend something that I've not actually read yet. There's Sarah Polley has got a book out of essays called Run Towards the Danger. And Sarah Polley is a filmmaker, actor, Canadian as well, and she big fan of her films. So I suspect this book will be kind of wise and essential as well, so I will get to that at some point. And yeah, can I mention a couple of films? There's one called, not books, but films. There's a film called Bardo, False Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, by the master Mexican filmmaker Alejandro Inarritu, which I recently watched. It's kind of, it's a quasi-biographical romp through magical realism. You know, a bit bloated, and I think some people have found it a difficult watch, but there are probably enough ideas in that film to fuel the advertising industry for at least the next 6 months. I think it's just full of like visual wonder and magic, and I found it breathtaking. I kind of watched it in chunks, and then watched like the last 45 minutes in one sitting. So that I found stunning, I thought. And then I also saw this short film quite by accident called Haul Out, which you can watch online. And it's set on the remote coastline somewhere in the Russian Arctic, made by a brother and sister team. And they shot something like 60 hours of footage over a period of 3 months there, with this one guy basically who lives in a shack there. The final cut of the film is 25 minutes long, but seriously, if they ever release the 60-hour cut of it, then I'm there for that. Wow. Front row seat. It was just, totally blew me away.
Awesome. There were links to all of those. I'll have to check that one out. That sounds incredible. Cool, thanks, Tim. And the number 4 is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give the reason why. So would you dedicate this episode?
Well, I want to give love and thanks to my wife, Emma, and our wonderful daughter, Gretel. But I want to dedicate, I thought I should dedicate, partly because it kind of brings our chat full circle, if you like. I would like to dedicate this chat to my grandparents, Harold Geoffrey Plester and Grace Plester, who were the grandparents who owned the newspaper business in Atterbury, whose comics I used to steal when I was a young boy. And I had a really close relationship with them. They were a really important part of my life growing up, and they're both sadly no longer with us. So yeah, I'd like to dedicate this to them. Really, they played a big part in my youth and my development.
Wonderful. Yeah, what a lovely dedication. Well, love to Emma and Gretel, of course, and this episode is very proudly dedicated to Harold and Grace Plester. Fantastic. Well, everything we've discussed, plus a lot more that we haven't had a time to discuss, is listed in this episode. We'll have all of those books. So we've got Herzog on Herzog.
Yeah.
Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. The book
Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, yep.
The Trespasser's Companion, Run Towards the Danger. Both of those films, The Haul Out, Bardo, I say film, documentary, the second one. As a final call to action then, how else can people listening get more Tim Plester?
The documentaries you've talked about, Giles, or we've hinted at, Way of the Morris and Ballad of Shirley Collins. They're both on available on Vimeo, both available on DVD as well, if such archaic system for your liking. The most recent documentary that me and Rob made together is called Southern Journey Revisited. That you can watch on Now TV. So I was thinking you could justify the price of the subscriptions so that you could watch the quite stellar The Last of Us, which is on Now TV at the moment. You could piggyback Southern Journey Revisited onto that maybe and justify that price. There's a film that I made in Iceland just before lockdown called Backyard Village that I'm acting in, that I'm really, really proud of. Here's another. I wanted to talk about Reading again. This is inspired by you. There's a film called Love Me Till Monday, which is a shoestring budget film set in Reading, which we made about 10 years ago. Most of the dialogue was improvised. That's also on Amazon, I think, Amazon Prime. And then, bits coming up, both on Netflix. There's a show called The Bastard Son and the Devil Himself, which is already out there, which I've got one memorable scene in that. There's a second series of a show called Shadow and Bone, which drops on March the 16th, I think. I'm in 2 episodes of that. So they're both on Netflix. So, get those whilst your shared password still works. I think they've reneged on that.
Oh, you're right. I saw
The latest news. It was announced by mistake, apparently.
Yeah, because it's easy to issue those sorts of global press releases.
It's so easily done, isn't it? It's easily done.
That remains me to do, Tim, is to say thank you once again. I've loved chatting. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege, mate.
I've really enjoyed it, Giles. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to have a natter with you. I've really enjoyed it. Fan of the show. Although in closing, because I know it'll go to this bit afterwards. Again, to return to the beginning when we were talking about the theme tune, I was listening to it the other day, and I'm not here to pick holes. So that's not one. But at the end, when it goes, I can't get no call to action, I'm sat there going, well, you can, because I've just had it. I mean, I'm still technically listening to it. I've had call to action, so I can get a call to action. I've just listened to it. I can get it. So, I don't actually want to consider that going forward, Giles, but those are my notes.
It's actually Mick Jagger. It's and no one will ever pick up on this, but I don't really care because it, in a weird, perverse way, it makes me happy. The original, obviously, that we're parodying is a Mick Jagger dig at advertising in the industry.
Do you know what? I thought that. I thought, is it kind of is Giles trying to repatriate the song, kind of take it back? Because exactly, it isn't an attack on the increasing commercialization of the modern world. Yeah. There you go.
There we go. Well, thanks again, Tim, and thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do share and review the pod. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online, or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.